Yeah.
in the area over the rock and after the rock, and they made little rock shirts. They had a rock.
I got one on.
Oh, great! They had the little rock stress ball they made.
Yeah.
There was a local state rep up there by the name of Todd Book who kind of
Yeah.
helped him with a lot of that stuff.
Well, he was the lawyer in
Yeah.
Portsmouth, and he had one of his descendants or ancestors had carved the Indian head. And I always thought he carved the original one. Well, but Steve said it was the other Indian head above it.
The actual
Yeah.
headdress and things.
Yeah.
And that's when we talked to Cliff Duvall last week. I asked him why did they drop the charges, and he says that they couldn't accurately prove that was the exact rock.
Yeah.
He didn't want to waste any more time.
Yeah.
And I think the state of Kentucky might have been a little upset about that. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. I didn't know. I thought it was dropped from higher up or so, and the judge I didn't know the judge gave him an ultimatum to settle it out of court.
yeah, that was strange.
Well, I think he saw Kentucky got a lot of bad publicity over the whole thing.
Kentucky and news media kind of go in a negative light anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, they kind of took it, and that's what Cliff Duvall told us, that they couldn't prove exactly that was the exact rock until
Yeah.
claiming,
And the other thing, I saw a transcript, I thought, that had Gwen Henderson in it. And I guess she was going to testify that it could have been made by Indians because the Shawnee had iron tools, which...
There's another archaeologist around the South Shore area who Steve told me about, and I've been trying to contact him, but he emailed me back, but it didn't seem like he was interested in talking. His name was Dwight Cropper.
Yeah, he was the one who instigated the whole thing.
Okay.
And he's an amateur archaeologist, I think, and he owns the Lower Shawnee Town property on the Kentucky side. And there wasn't much of a interest in rock until he got involved in publicizing.
A lot of emails that Dwight had sent him.
Oh yeah.
And he was pretty supercharged.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
talk to him, and there was it Fred Coy who actually came and wrote about the rock?
Yeah. Coy was the expert in petroglyphs in Kentucky. He has a book out on it and so on.
He's since passed away, though.
Yeah.
I know he was an elder man.
Yeah.
Are we rolling, buddy?
I'm rolling.
Am I rolling on good on my side?
Not sure.
Yep.
I think you are.
All right, start off with here today. Tell us your name and your title at the time of let's not say debacle. The removal of Indian Head Rock.
Okay. My name's Bob Maslowski. At the time, well, it wasn't the time of the removal, but I was the archaeologist for the Huntington District Corps of Engineers for 28 years. And I retired in 2004 before the rock was moved.
So you have a obvious background in archaeology. Did you study the Mississippi Valley or petroglyphs of this region?
Not necessarily. I have a PhD in anthropology, archaeology from the University of Pittsburgh, and my specialization was Ohio Valley archaeology, mainly Middle and Upper Ohio Valley archaeology, the area I covered with the Huntington District Corps of Engineers. And I also worked in Israel, Cyprus, Laos, Vietnam, and in several places, Trans-Pecos, Texas.
When did you first hear of Indian Head Rock?
I guess it was when Steve contacted me, I think in about 2000. He said they thought they had located. He was looking for submerged petroglyphs all along the Ohio River, especially in the northern part of the state. In this area, there were numerous petroglyphs that were submerged after the construction of the first lock and dam system. And basically he wanted to know if the Corps of Engineers was interested in this. And I said, well, yeah, because first of all, the Corps maintains that, the original lock and dam system that inundated the petroglyphs was there was no Historic Preservation Act at that time that would have required coordination or anything like that. But every so many years they do an operation and maintenance EIS or assessment, and I felt that they should assess the submerged petroglyphs and see which ones are in existence and if they were protected or not.
What are some of the histories of the rock that you've actually researched or have discussed with somebody like Steve Schaefer?
Well, as far as I know, Steve has a better grasp of the history of the rock. But I know it was recorded by James Swagger as an archaeological site in the state of Ohio, and it's mentioned, I think, in his Petroglyphs of Ohio book. And after that, like I said, Steve would have a better grasp on some of the more dramatic instances of how the rock was perceived and used.
Was it common for rocks or any kind of formations like this in water to have people refer to them as Indian or some sort of indigenous tie?
There's actually several petroglyphs that are identified as Indian heads, and most of the time they refer to modern rocks where Indian heads were carved on it, and it's usually in a headdress, a Plains Indian motif rather than local Indian motifs. I think there's one in Huntington near their garbage disposal area. There was one in Paintsville, Kentucky, and the one here at Portsmouth.
So was the face carved on the Indian head rock of indigenous or Indian origin?
No, it was obviously carved with stone tools, the same as all of the other markings on the rock.
Yeah, Kentucky still considers it Indian origin. I'm amazed by that.
I am too. There's no basis for an Indian origin of the rock. And the people who have looked at it and studied it, like the petroglyphic expert from Kentucky, Fred Coy, have determined that it was of European manufacture.
Was the rock more of a Portsmouth historical item or Greenup or South Shore, Kentucky?
The rock, it was associated with Portsmouth. Everything about the rock was associated with Portsmouth. If you look at the newspaper accounts, it was a great tourist attraction for the Portsmouth area when the rock was exposed by low water.
So how did you become acquainted with Steve Schaefer in his quest to find the rock?
Well, I think I got a telephone call from Steve Schaefer in 2000 asking about if the Corps had any interest in locating this rock. And he came to my office and we discussed it, and we ended up going out. I got Dewey Sanderson, a geologist from Marshall University, involved, and we plotted out all the historical information and tried to get the approximate location of the rock. And we actually had a team doing side scan sonar at one point of the Meldal Pool where the rock is located, and basically I asked them if they could locate the rock, And they did go out and they found 2 rocks, basically, that showed up on the side scan sonar. And I went out another time with Steve and his divers, and at that time I don't think they were successful in locating the rock. It was after that on another dive that they located the rock.
Yeah, several trips for Steve to find the rock. But when you found out about they actually found the rock, were you excited for Steve?
Yes, I was. Basically, the weekend they went out to retrieve the rock, I got an email from Steve saying if I was available to come out to Portsmouth, and I was in Williamsburg at the time, and I said no, I couldn't make it. I was in Williamsburg. And it was only after a couple weeks later that I found out that they had retrieved the rock.
So, Bob, what's your thoughts now on the rock setting in a municipal county garage covered by a tarp?
Well, I didn't think anything good would come of the moving the rock to Kentucky. I always felt that it was Portsmouth's property, basically. The people of Portsmouth, created all of the figures on the rock. It wasn't Native American, and that Kentucky wasn't going to spend money interpreting Ohio's history, basically. I thought it would be put on display at a state park or something. I think that was the original idea, and I always thought I'd have to make a trip out there someday to look at it. And I was kind of appalled when I found out it was still in a garage.
Railroad tie. They made a wall, kind of walled it off with a tarp.
Yeah.
And there's a tarp covering it. Is this environment hard on a sandstone boulder right now?
I don't know. It's partially protected. It depends if the area has any climate control in it. If it's freezing and thawing, there could be some problems with that.
So have there been other cases similar to Indian Head Rock, where a rock of some historical origin was removed from one area and actually moved to another with success?
Actually, there's been several examples in West Virginia. Probably the most famous one was the Cerrito petroglyph, which was a Native American petroglyph that was dredged out of the Ohio River. And this again shows you that, because it's submerged in water isn't exactly protection for a petroglyph. And it was dredged out in the 1970s and given to the Cerrito Museum. It's on display in Cerrito today. If you go up to Point Pleasant, in the park there at the point, there's an Indian petroglyph, the Panther petroglyph, which was moved from its original location to the park. The preservation of that one wasn't real successful because at first they never put it in a protected area and it eroded badly. Now they built a small shelter over it. I don't know if that'll help too much or not. There's also a petroglyph, the Clifton petroglyph, that is located in Blennerhassett Island in the museum at Blennerhassett. And right up the road here we have this hurricane petroglyph, or the prom queen petroglyph as I used to call it. And this is another example of things that can go wrong if you don't have a preservation plan, if you don't know anything about petroglyphs. First of all, most of what you see on the hurricane petroglyph is European. The head is Native American. You can tell the difference in the carving just as you can tell on the Indian Head Rock. The body on the petroglyph was added in 1940s or so by some kids in the local area. It was located where the car dealership is off I-64, and I think they spent $15,000 to relocate the petroglyph. They put it in the parking lot next to the fire station. There's no interpretation, no coverage of it, and much of the figure is heavily eroded just after about 20 years.
Bobby Carpenter, the judge executive of Greenup, told us he would love to find the rock a home where it could be appreciated. Where do you think a good home for it would be?
I think, the only good home would be in Portsmouth if they'll take it at this time. The original plan of the Corps of Engineers was to actually move the rock. We discussed this with the Kentucky Heritage Commission. We knew it was in Kentucky water, and basically after a short discussion with Dave Pollock, we agreed that if the Corps was involved in it, the best way to handle it would be to get a determination of eligibility, and just consensus determination of eligibility that was eligible for the National Register. That way, if everyone agrees, you don't have to go through a formal process of evaluating it and so on. And then Kentucky could give it on permanent loan to the city of Portsmouth. And there were plans first to put it into the museum in Portsmouth, and then later on there was a problem with that, and they would put it in their visitors center interpretive facility.
Yeah. Well, at what point did the whole Indian Head rock out of the water, and of course the news media latched onto it? At what point did it all start getting kind of zany and war between the states?
Gee, that's a good question.
Because it seemed early on, because I'd interviewed the Portsmouth mayor,
Yeah.
and he said they offered it to South Shore, and they said, we don't really have a place for it.
Yeah.
It'll be over here. And then all of a sudden, it's in the New York Times.
Yeah. I think it's after the Kentucky politicians got involved and wanted to make it an issue. And the other thing that I got from Duval, the prosecuting attorney, was that basically he told me that, he felt sorry for Steve Schaefer, but Kentucky had a big pot hunting problem. And people were coming into Kentucky and digging Indian burial sites, selling materials and stuff like that, which I was well aware of it. And I think some of the people in Kentucky and most of the archaeologists felt that this would make a good case to stop that pot hunting problem. And unfortunately, it was the wrong case to do it. It probably had no effect on it.
Yeah, Steve got beat up pretty bad in
Yeah.
the process. And now, Greenup County has the rock. They would like to get rid of it because they need to use that space for salt.
Yeah.
Which is feasible because that's what that garage was built for. Greenup doesn't have the money to do anything with the rock. They tried to give it to the state park. Kentucky state parks don't have any money to do anything with the rock. So it's in this weird limbo, rock purgatory, if you will.
Yeah. Good example of hysterical preservation. People think they have a good idea on historic preservation, and they go off on really weird tangents. I've seen this happen several times in other cases in West Virginia.
Yeah, the county judge there, he's a really nice guy. He's 20-year county elected official. He kind of felt that the rock was just kind of almost dumped on him to do something with.
Right.
By the state, you can't tell the state no.
Yeah. Well, the Corps of Engineers required Steve to have a preservation plan for the rock, which he produced, and Kentucky should have done the same thing before they took the rock.
So far, all the folks I've spoken to know of no preservation plan for Kentucky,
Right,
other than they wanted to give it to the Greenbow State Park,
right.
and that was just an initial idea. And I think as far as it went, when they looked up the numbers to move
Yeah. I assumed that it went to Greenbow State Park, and like I said before, I was interested to seeing how they interpreted it and preserved it, but obviously that didn't come about.
No, it's still in the same location. Bob, any closing comments you'd like to say about the rock?
No, I can't really think of anything else. You pretty much covered everything.
It was definitely an interesting process. It went from, that's what I find interesting though, it went from Steve finding the rock and pulling it from the river and giving it to Portsmouth in a celebration, and Kentucky knew about it, especially in the local Kentucky area. And the South Shore mayor said, we really don't have a place for it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden being this war between the states. I think it's any excuse for a news story.
That's true. It made the news quite often at that